to another Western Ag Life Voices podcast, where we celebrate the people that make up the rich fabric of the Western lifestyle. Please do us a favor and thank the sponsors, because without them, we couldn't bring you these free podcasts.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paul Ramirez with the Western Ag Life podcast. It's a great day here today in Arizona, and I have a wonderful guest on us with this morning. And the first time I've ever done this as a podcast, I want to do this disclaimer. I want to let the guest's name know that their likeness may be used in advertising and promotional materials for this program, but not as an endorsement for any product or service. Some of you are probably going to ask why I had to do that, and that's because we have Chelsea Good from the Livestock Marketing Association on this morning, and of course she's an attorney, and she is their legal counsel, and so I got her on here. That's just a little joke there, Chelsea.
Yeah, a disclaimer. I've never had a disclaimer to start a podcast out before.
See there? Anyways, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Paul.
What's happening in Kansas City?
You know, we're actually hoping spring's here to stay, and I travel so much for work, and this is a rare week that I'm going to be in Kansas City all week, which is kind of nice.
Amen. Well, so we'll just so you had a little experience last week, and you went back to your alma mater, right?
Oh, no, actually not my alma mater. Went to Stillwater for the boys from Oklahoma. Yeah, so I'm a good K-State gal.
I do remember that.
Yeah, I could flip this around and show you 3 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree from K-State up my wall. But
so you're a Wildcat.
I am a Wildcat, but I judged in junior college at Butler, which is in Stillwater or in El Dorado, Kansas. And there's not a whole lot there except for the JUCO and an oil refinery. And so weekends we weren't judging. We'd either go north to Manhattan or south to Stillwater. And so Cross Canadian Ragweed was very much a part of my college experience. So it was nice to be back in Stillwater and see them back together again.
Amen. I saw lots of, photographs and so forth on social media, and it looked like it was quite a time there, huh?
It was an awesome concert. They played, there were 5 bands, but they played from like 5:30 p.m. till 12:30 a.m., which is not a time I typically see anymore.
Oh, you were glad to be home to recoup, huh?
For sure.
Hey, let's we'll just kind of go back. I'd like to hear about, your childhood and kind of when we'll just kind of play up into where you are today, So tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and kind of about, your childhood lifestyle, and then we'll kind of migrate into your junior high school showing career and, how you ended up where you are today.
Sounds good. So I grew up in Parker, Colorado, which is south of Denver. Douglas County actually was the fastest growing county in the nation at the time. It's really, really expanded. But grew up on small acreage. It was my parents' goal to have enough land by the time I was 4-H age so that we could have livestock. And so my dad's a livestock market economist for Cattle Facts. And so that's what took my folks to Colorado when they got done school at Kansas State. And I have 2 younger brothers. They're 6 and 10 years younger than me, which is kind of fun. Yeah, it's actually kind of fun because
they had 2 moms, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Kelton, my youngest brother in particular, he's 10 years younger. And I would get phone calls from him about, hey, something happened and can we handle this, or mom and dad going to have to know about this, because by the time he was in high school, I was an attorney. Right. And so that's been kind of fun. We're really close, just kind of in different ways than some siblings are. But I showed growing up hogs, cattle, sheep, 1 goat, which was kind of a funny story. I got a goat because I asked for a horse. And my dad was very quick to say that if he couldn't eat it, I couldn't have it. And I came back about a week later and I said, well, do people eat goats? And he's like, yeah, why? And I was like, oh, I'll have one of those. So that was a one-time experience. Really enjoyed the hogs and cattle more than everything else. And actually probably the livestock judging was maybe my favorite component of what I did growing up. I enjoyed the showing, but I really enjoyed the judging and some of the other competitions, the speech competitions, the parliamentary procedure, the things that you get to do in 4-H and FFA. In addition to the livestock components, were really big parts of me growing up.
And so you were also an FFA. You were involved in Future Farmers.
I was.
Yeah, what a great organization that is. Yeah, I have to give a lot of credit for everything that I have in my current life now. I was a state officer, and I got, of course, American Farmer degree, but still to this day, on a daily basis, I have relations with people that I met, when I was a Future Farmer.
Yeah, both 4-H and FFA were great to me. It is funny. So I was in DC week before last and ran into somebody, Jeff Berry from Wyoming, and he and I met in high school. At I think it's Citizenship Washington Focus. That might be the 4-H version of the. So my junior year, I spent 2 weeks in DC the summer after my junior year. 4-H sent me for a trip, and then I was the district president. So FFA also sent me for a trip. So that's where I first met Jeff Berry, who now works with producers, and just the world gets really small, right? Mm-hmm. And you're right. Some of those connections I made, and growing up in those organizations and competing are people that I still interact with to this day.
For sure. And I think it's pretty cool now, that our Secretary of Agriculture, was very active, Future Farmer member, state officer in the state of Texas. And
for sure. It was neat. During her confirmation hearing, her entire state officer team came to her confirmation hearing, which I think really says something, as did her FFA advisor. So I think that was really, really cool. She actually, I've gotten to meet her since she's taken the role, and easy to talk to, and very much feels like one of us, which was something some people, were wondering about. And I'm excited about that. I actually have friends who their kids show against her kids in Texas. So that is neat.
Yeah, I had heard some really good things also in the fact that, that she was going to be a good representative of us as a whole. And so that's pretty cool. And I always kind of wonder how that comes about. I'm sure there were people on the short list, and how they got down to her.
I was following that short list really closely. I had some good friends on the short list. And, I think that for President Trump in particular, relationships really matter. And so it's actually, in my mind, an opportunity for ag, that I think that we have the cabinet secretary who has the closest personal relationship with the president. That is something that we will probably need from time to time. And so I'm glad that she has that connection, and hopefully can use it to agriculture's advantage.
And certainly, I think, as we come into this tariff, situation that, we're about to embark on, I'm certainly, I'm pretty certain that him and her are going to have a lot of dialogue going forward.
They absolutely will. I mean, as you know, Paul, a lot of agriculture products are imported and exported every day. And so tariffs are going to be a challenging topic for our industry to navigate. I am trying to withhold judgment because I do remember, the first time that Trump was president, that there were market access payments that were made in a recognition that, there were, attempts to make a good long-term impact, that there was short-term harm created. And the secretary has been clear that if it's needed, that will happen again.
Well, I know for sure, I don't want to spend too much time here because I want to get back to you. But I know for sure that, the pecan industry in Arizona was affected and still has not, from that first term, still hasn't, came back to what it was.
Hasn't fully recovered.
So, okay. So you go, then you go, do you go to JUCO college or do you go to university?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you got to go to JUCO if you're a good livestock judge. You get a year of eligibility JUCO, a year of eligibility senior college. And so since that was my favorite thing and what I really thought I wanted to focus on, I went to Butler in El Dorado, Kansas. They've got a great junior college judging program. Chris Molnix was the coach there at the time. So that's where I spent my first 2 years of school.
And then, of course, why did you then choose to go to Kansas State?
Because it's the best university.
That was easy, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, K-State's got a great college of ag. It is a family school. It's a legacy school for the goods. my dad's uncle, so my grandpa's brother, my great uncle Don Good, actually my double great uncle because brothers married sisters. Don Good was the animal science department head at Kansas State for quite some time. He's got just an interesting backstory. Actually, in 1969 at the International in Chicago, great uncle Don would have selected. He was the judge. He selected the first crossbred steer to win a major international show, and really kind of changed the dialogue on crossbreeding and hybrid vigor. Conoco was the name of the steer. It was a Charolais cross. And if you look at the carcass results to this day, it would have been, a phenomenal animal. But, in addition to being a great livestock judge and getting some awesome opportunities in terms of going to other countries to help select animals to be imported as kind of the beginning of different breeds, great uncle Don, spent a long time as department head at animal science at Kansas State. And so there's just a lot of family tie there. Both my folks went there. Dad actually grew up on a cow-calf operation in Michigan, and we've got Michigan State ties as well, Ohio State ties. But when he was looking at schools, he decided K-State was a place, and I did the same.
Hey, man. Yeah. Some good friends of ours are big supporters of K-State, the Levine family, and they're involved in the mining and engineering school there. They have quite a legacy there. So
it's the happiest town in America. Manhattan, Kansas is pretty special. So if you've got any listeners looking at colleges, I'd encourage them just to visit. You don't have to go there, but if you visit, you might decide you want to.
Hey, man. And then we have another friend that's on the rodeo team now that I speak,
that
I'm thinking about it. Yeah. Allie Napier is on the rodeo team there at Kansas State. So go Very Wildcats, good. Right?
Yeah. Go Cats.
Go Cats. Hey, so you end up, you decide, and then, so what had all along when you were going into, to the university, you had in mind that you were going to, go to law school?
I knew I was going to be a livestock lobbyist. I didn't know if law school was going to be part of that path, but thought it probably would be. I was probably, early high school when I did a National Beef Ambassador speech competition, actually on the constitutionality of the beef checkoff. And I was, did a lot of research. I was fascinated by it. Ended up becoming a National Beef Ambassador. And so that gave me the opportunity to go to Cattle Industry Convention for the first time and sit in the back of the room as those policy meetings were happening. And I was hooked, totally hooked. I knew that is where I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to be engaged in. And so I knew livestock policy was the answer. I wasn't positive about law school. Dad told me I liked to argue too much to be anything but a lawyer. And I got a little bored academically, particularly early college. And I think he made the offer of, okay, well, if you stick this out and you go to law school, we'll help you with that. And so I think those things were motivational. I did stay an extra year in Manhattan and get a master's kind of in between my undergrad degrees and my law degree. That mostly was just, I wasn't quite ready to be done with Manhattan, Kansas. I joined the debate team as a senior in college, had a really great novice debate career. I actually went in the novice national championship with one of my former livestock judging teammates, which was kind of fun. Ryan Bennett and I were novice national champion debaters together as seniors, probably debating a lot of freshmen, but fair is fair. And so I loved Manhattan. I wasn't quite ready to be done with the town and probably that debate community. And so I got a assistantship to get a master's degree. My master's was in communication studies. I did my thesis research on rural beef producers talking to an urban public and whether facts and data is most persuasive or stories and narratives. And we ended up finding it's a blend of both, which I think is something I thought would be the answer. But in ag, we are just so data driven sometimes that we forget that some people need to hear that we care and need to hear the story behind, raising livestock in order to feel comfortable feeding beef to their families. And so we need to blend both of those things into our arguments. I think we've gotten much better at that than we were at that time. That was kind of the very early days of advocacy.
Oh, amen. Amen.
So, so that was kind of a slight detour, and then went to Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas for the law degree.
And so, so when you're in law school, at some point in time, you have to make a decision, whether you're going to be like a trial lawyer or going to be, counsel. What at what point in time did you make a decision there, kind of how you were going to go forward?
Probably my freshman or sophomore year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I knew policy was for me, right? And so even when I was getting the law degree, I kind of knew I probably wasn't going to practice proper, right? I probably wasn't going to hang a shingle or join a big firm and bill by the hour. I think we definitely need ag lawyers. We really need ag lawyers. I would encourage
Amen.
anybody who is potentially interested in that career path to pursue it, because it's very necessary. It just wasn't 100% for me. I knew the policy side was what was for me. So I kind of front loaded my coursework. I was thinking I would end up going out to DC and doing an externship with the Senate Ag Committee and then probably staying for 3 to 7 years. That's kind of what a lot of people end up doing in DC is you spend some time at the Hill, maybe some time at USDA and start to, kick off your policy career that way. So that was the path I had mapped out for myself. Ended up getting an opportunity mid-law school that totally changed my path, which I think is also a lesson that we can't always, we can have a goal and we can have a roadmap, but we've got to pay attention that when God provides opportunities that are not what we're expecting, pay attention to those. So for me, that was a governor getting elected in the state of Kansas. I was a 2L, second-year law student, and I got a call from a good friend and mentor, Jackie McClaskey, who said, look, every state agency needs a new communications director. I think you could do that job. I think you could be the communications director for the Kansas Department of Agriculture. And I told her, yeah, I think I could also do that job. That would be a cool job, but I'm in law school. And she's like, well, why don't you do both? So I
Wow.
did.
Oh, really?
So my second half of law school, I worked full time. I was a communications director at the Kansas Department of Agriculture and then finished out law school kind of on the side.
Man, you didn't have any time to get in trouble.
Unfortunately, no, I didn't. Especially that summer I took the bar exam was not a fun summer. Actually, this ties back to what we did this weekend. My best guy friend from law school, Tyler Turner, his wife, Rebecca, was one of the girls that went with me to this concert. And one of the openers was The Great Divide. And I will never forget the day we took the last day of the bar exam. It's a multi-day test. The last day of the bar exam, Tyler and Rebecca and I went and saw The Great Divide live at the Granada in Lawrence, Kansas. And music has never sounded so good. Food has never tasted so good. It was like you were black and white and suddenly you saw color again.
Like you were coming back as a hostage or something, right?
Yeah, really, it's the closest I hope to ever get to a hostage situation is working full time and studying for the bar exam. Because I only wanted to take the bar once. I probably blew way past, how much I needed to study, but you never know. And so I played it safe. And I'm one of those people that I'm not a huge rules person, but I make rules for myself, right? And my rule for myself that summer is I couldn't have fun. I could work and study, and that was it. I'll never forget, like, I got an invite to go out with friends on the lake, the weekend before, and I was sure I was ready, but I was like, man, if you break your rule now, there's karma. And so, you didn't go out to the lake, studied that weekend, and took the bar and did fine.
And so let me ask you, I've always been intrigued a little bit by, because what, attorneys that I know, they always talk about, the kind of that being kind of that benchmark, for them in the bar. And so tell me how much, so is there's of course written component to the bar. And then is there also, is there a spoken part of the bar that you have to defend?
There was not when I took the bar, and the bar exam has changed since I took the bar exam. But generally, what I took was kind of two components. It was a multiple choice exam, and then it was a written essay exam. And since then, some states have made changes, but for the most part, it continues to be mostly a written exam.
Oh, really? So there's no, you don't speak in any part of it, like
there's not, and even law school is a little bit that way. So a lot of young people ask me, oh, I want to go to law school, I want to be a lawyer. Like, how do I prepare myself? And my answer is become a good writer, because all of your grades in law school, this has started to change a little bit as well, but traditionally, and still the majority of law schools, you get one grade in a class, and it is your final exam. And it is a couple hour written exam, essay style. And so if you're not a good writer, good communicator, somebody who can express your thoughts well in writing and organize writing well, you're starting way behind. And so that's advice to future attorneys, but as somebody who mentors young people, hires young people, or even not young people, I think writing skills is something that many people are lacking coming out of college. And I don't care what you do for work. You're probably going to send an email or a text message or write something on a Post-it from time to time. Let's be good at that.
Mm-hmm. That surprises me because, I just think about, the communication component about being an attorney. I figure that there would have been some, portion in there that, they would certainly want to decide, who goes forward with that degree, with not having, with whatever capabilities they have as far as linguistic.
You would think so, but no, you can become a lawyer without opening your mouth once. I kind of self-selected towards some activities that did gravitate towards the oral. So, for example, I was part of a moot court team. So Tyler and I went to New York City, and the moot court was kind of like a mock trials type of a situation. But we got credit for it, but it was kind of an extracurricular. I opted to take a lot of classes that were more practical and applied in nature. It was kind of a blessing for me that a lot of times those are taught by adjunct faculty rather than full-time faculty. So a lot of times they're night classes. Well, I had a full-time job, right? So it worked perfect for me that I wanted to take, classes with adjunct professors and more applied classes. And they happened to be more likely to be night classes. I also did some independent study. I talked to a couple of professors into letting me either write a big paper or do some things like that was more ag focused, and the research was particular to the areas of law in which I knew I would interact in the future.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the whole time though, being mindful that you are going to come back and you're going to take whatever skills you've acquired and then participate in the agriculture industry.
For sure. I was never questioned in my mind about that. I think I cannot imagine a life where ag is not in the middle of it.
Amen. Yeah, me too. I just do things. I didn't want to go to school that much. And I'm not sure I had the intelligence either, but anyways, no, wonderful. Yeah.
There's book smarts and there's street smarts. And I'll tell you, there are plenty of people who make their way through law school that I wouldn't have on an island with me if we were stranded.
I know some of them. my dad used to tease me because he always said, you're going to be an attorney, because I was a tremendous debater. Even 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I could debate. He said, you're going to use something with your mouth. And lo and behold, he prefaced that I would end up being an auctioneer. So yeah. You're right.
Yeah. And, similar, I'm somebody who's always liked to discuss ideas and is very comfortable with disagreement. And that is unique. Not all humans are comfortable with disagreement. And so in order to be good at policy work, I think you need to be. And I am. Honestly, for me, it's almost the opposite direction, where I need to read the room and say, is this the moment where we disagree, or do we just even if they're wrong, do we let them go down this path because we're going to hold our powder dry for something different? And that's where I have had some growth in my career.
Yeah, for me on social media, especially right now, I just have to scroll really quickly. I know what areas and what people that I can actually read, and I'm like, what I'm amazed, and this is really what, and of course, we don't want to get off on a rabbit trail, but we probably could for an hour or so. I'm just amazed that people make these really, really rock hard decisions, and they just don't have the information.
For sure. This drives me crazy, and it drives my brother crazy, because I don't armchair quarterback, right? If you want to talk about livestock policy and what might happen, I am there. We're going to talk about it. But sometimes my brother will even try and get me to talk about some really big picture politics that is, just a different ball game, or speculate on anything. And my answer is always I don't have enough information to engage in this conversation. It drives him crazy because he likes a little speculation. He wants to debate me, but he wants to debate me on things that aren't totally my space, and it drives him nuts that I won't get out of my lane.
And then, of course, you're A-type personality. You're not going to get engaged in something you can't win, right?
A+ personality.
You're like my
and
wife.
A competitor. Yeah, I love to compete. Love to compete.
Yeah, we're not going to go down there if I can't beat you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
No, I just
with one exception. With one exception, Paul. I love to golf, and I'm not yet a good golfer. But I think in golf, you're competing against yourself. You have a handicap, and so you're trying to improve your handicap. Or if you're competing against somebody else, you can handicap the competition. So every time my husband and I play, it's $10 a hole. I mean, he's a 2 handicap. He's a very good golfer. I am not. But we end up passing about, the right amount of money back and forth from, one night stand to the other, because you have a way to utilize a handicap to make that competition a level playing field.
Amen. Did you watch the Masters on Sunday?
I watched the end for sure. And I'm excited for Rory.
Gosh.
He Grand Slam's a big deal. He earned it. Going to an extra hole for me was kind of fun. Chad, my husband, was wanting it to be over and wanting him to win. I said, no, I think I'm not probably for, a bunch of extra holes, but one extra hole is fun.
That thing played out almost like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost, it has the components of like, a movie,
Yeah.
It's just,
and something about persistence and grit and, like I saw some analysis of like, you don't play the game you thought you were going to play, you play the game that you're in. Right. And he had some moments. I think he had a double bogey on that last day that,
I think he had
really
2.
took his lead away. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the beginning of the day. And then, towards the beginning of the second 9, he had a double bogey that, he could have reacted and, got in his own head and lost it. And he didn't. He stayed, totally level. And boy, that 19th hole, he played about perfect. I've watched that actually a couple times over again. He played that hole about perfect.
Yeah, I've watched the winning part. Of course, I love everything about motivational, and I love,
Mm-hmm.
people that can take control of their life and, and handle their own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we all know, and certainly this through just the education process that you've endured, is that these things just they're not accidental. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're intentional. And when, for him to win, especially in the style and the amount of time that he had won, it was so intentional. You know what I mean? Just
for sure. Yeah. Golf is an amazing head game. There's only one other sport that I would consider even close to golf as it relates to head game, and that's wrestling.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause just the strategy and the approach that you have to
Mm-hmm.
have, but to see him endure for as long as he had, and then to prevail, I mean, it has all the essence of a, success story in of itself. And hopefully, a lot of young people, will see and find out, and learn the story, his story,
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully they'll be motivated by that. Just never give up, continue to endure. So
takes hard work, right? I think that we are in a little bit of an instant gratification society. Everybody's got a cell phone right there. If you've got a question, you can get an answer right away. And it would, unlike when I grew up and you had to like ask an adult or like look something up in the dictionary. And if
we had encyclopedias.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You ever saw one of those?
For sure. I had a nickname. I should not admit this. My nickname growing up was the Walking Encyclopedia. So about like 2nd or 3rd grade, friends would like open the encyclopedia and ask me a question, which just says really cool things about me, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, for us, that was like one of the rare books we had in the house. That was a big deal for families back in the 60s. If you purchased an encyclopedia set, and a lot of people made payments on them. They bought them with a down payment, and then you paid payments on encyclopedias. So some of you are listening. I'm dating myself quite a bit, but
I think that's cool because that is investing in knowledge and education, right? Like I'm not somebody who's loves debt, right? I'm a little bit of a Dave Ramsey person. You only do debt on, a home or land or something that's gonna, gain you something in the long run. But I think encyclopedias might be one of those things.
Amen. But and I tell my daughter Madison, who you've met, she's at. I said, Madison, you're an incredible time in life right now. Is all the technology? I mean, look at the technology we're on right now. I mean, I'm able to, even in my very non-educated knowledge of anything to do with video and audio production, I'm able to put this podcast on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have any help. And I know some of you that listen to the podcast for a long time are going to say, yeah, we know that.
I can tell.
By my engineering, by my course engineering. But
Uh-huh.
anyways, I'm able to do this. And so like young people today, they have no idea. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of opportunity, even like I'm in real estate. And so even like microfiche, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
Years ago, everything used to be on microfiche, and you'd
Mm-hmm.
have to go down to the city courthouse,
Mm-hmm.
and you would actually have to go through files and pull a microfiche out to get documents.
Unfortunately, I'm a little too familiar with that. Some of our legislative records are still on microfiche. And so, as I've researched some topics, ag topics, have a long history. I worked at KDA first as the communications director, but then after I graduated law school, I was a staff attorney and animal health policy expert. And I spent some time on microfiche, looking into the history of certain regulation or legislation, especially in the state of Kansas. But you make a great point, Paul. And I hope it's leveling, right? I hope it's leveling, not necessarily of outcome, but of opportunity. I hope that, young people today recognize that you've got these tools at your fingertips. You can do a lot with them. It does take, I think, other people in your life, probably adults that plant the seed that you can do anything you want to do and you can be anything you want to be. But boy, a 10-year-old today has way more and different opportunities than a 10-year-old did even when I was growing up, or when you were growing up, or, take it back a little further. My husband talks about, just indoor plumbing and electric, and, people sometimes bellyache about what is the world coming to. And he's like, I don't want to go back to that. I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the opportunity, and the technology is absolutely, incredible. I was going to tell you, we're talking about microfiche, but I actually have a real estate situation that's, transpiring right now. And there was a document in there that they couldn't find the document, and the title company was just, they just could not find this document. It was a patent on a mining claim, and they couldn't find it. Well, lo and behold, they had to go to the county records, and they're only because this particular situation hadn't had a transaction on it for over 100 years, and that instrument is only in writing.
For sure.
And thank
I
God they
want
found
to
it.
be surprised, but I'm not. One of my really good friends is an oil and gas attorney, and he spends way more time on the road than he would like to. He's actually a former landman. Got a master's in ag econ, was a landman for a while, and then went to law school. He was like me. We sat next to each other. He only cared about oil and gas. I only cared about ag. But he spends more time on the road than he would like to, because in order to protect some of those titles, he has to go to those local county courthouses to pull some of that background as it relates to oil and gas and royalties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just so I mean, that just tells you, where we've came, and so I love the fact what you said. Young people, especially if hopefully they're listening. Man, you guys have a tremendous opportunity, and there's so much. Even like of course, in the real estate, we market a lot. But like Canva and all of the things that are available now that I can basically get on and do and cut and paste. I mean, I literally. My wife will tell you my first business cards that she made for me when we got in the auction business, she literally was the cut and paste. I mean, she literally scissored,
actual cut and paste.
And
so I
pasted them with
used
glue.
to type Grandma and Grandpa Good's Christmas letter every year on a typewriter. And, if you messed up a word that, we didn't have whiteout, that's what you did, is you cut and pasted over. And then once I got the letter right, then they would go make copies of it in town.
Crazy. Most people won't even know what a typewriter is anymore now.
Yeah, I own one, believe it or not.
Yeah,
I've
my
got
wife has one.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a fetish with old stuff, and for some reason, like office equipment, some of it makes sense. Yeah, I've got a lot of like an old Stockyards pencils. That makes sense. But some of the stuff I acquire at estate sales and antique stores, who knows why, but I'm a little bit of a collector.
Stockyard pencils. You know who's the king of that?
Who?
Tom Fry.
Ooh, that does not surprise me. I'll have to send Tom a picture. I actually was
Yeah.
looking at my collection the other day, and I've got one that looks like a cigarette. It's actually a pen, not a pencil, but it's a commission firm that made a pen that looks like a little cigarette.
Yeah. Tom Fry. Yeah. Tell Tom, hit him up. Say, hey, Tom hasn't given you a pencil.
He hasn't. I'm going to call
There you
Tall
go.
Tom. I'm going to
Yeah.
call Tall Tom after we talk, and I'm going to let him know
Hey,
I'm a little disappointed.
oh, he has a tremendous collection. Trust me,
Uh,
I've seen it. I've physically seen it, and then Tom has also blessed me with a few gifts, and so
that's nice.
I'm
I think
sure
we're
he'll
going to
bless you.
sell some at the convention this summer. So I run our political action committee for Livestock Marketing Association, and our main fundraiser is the pack auction at convention. And I think I've got put together a handful of pencils from Omaha stockyards. I think maybe a sign and a couple other things. It's going to be like a vintage package, which people like me are interested in that sort of things. And I think a lot of our members are as well.
Hey man, yeah, ag people are nostalgic, as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Old
Yeah.
trucks and old things, and they
Oh,
and I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's good for us to look back and see, like especially certain plows,
Mm-hmm.
like a 4 disc plow anymore. That was, my grandfather. I mean, that was like a modern thing that came out when they got a 4 disc plow that was pulled with a tractor,
Yeah.
not with a mule, and
Mm-hmm.
so those kind of things. So we're nostalgic. So going into, so now you graduate, you get the bar. So now,
Uh-huh.
did you have an idea where you're going to go as far as career wise?
I think I knew I wanted to be a livestock lobbyist, but I was starting to reevaluate how do you get there, right? Because at this point, I bought a home pre-law school, and so got kind of used to living in a home that I owned and making a little bit of money. And if you'd moved to DC at that point in time, you're renting an apartment and sharing it with a bunch of roommates. And so I was kind of toying with maybe that's still what I need to do. But before I do that, let's try practicing law, at this agency that I'm already at. So I went to Jackie, my boss. I said, hey, I want to become a staff attorney. When I pass the bar, I want to, transfer and move into the legal team. And she said, you're going to hate it. And I said, well, I might. But I didn't spend 3 years getting a law degree to not use it at all. And so I transferred. I became a staff attorney, worked for the animal health commissioner. It was Dr. Bill Brown at the time in Kansas, and did some fun stuff. I helped with the process of writing the trichomoniasis regulations in Kansas. It's actually the first time I met Terry Chapman and Roy Barta, which would have been the two regional officers that were covering Kansas at the time. They came to lobby on what they wanted the trick regulations to look like, and it was a hearing, and the state vet was presiding, but I was his counsel that was going to actually be putting the words on paper. So did some cool stuff like that. They did give me a chance to also be part of the legislative team, and so we worked on strengthening Kansas's right to farm law, which can have a couple different meanings. In this context, it was moving to the nuisance, making it so if you've got a farm and somebody chooses to build a subdivision right next to the farm, they don't get to legally complain about it being dusty or smelly or dirty because they moved to the nuisance. So that was fun to get to look at other state models and figure out, what are the best pieces of each of these state models, and shepherd through the Kansas legislative process a bill to make the Kansas protections there as good as any. Enjoyed those things, but also kind of knew always I wanted to work for industry rather than for the regulator. And so when Nancy Robinson retired in 2012, and my name came up to Mark Mackey, our CEO, as somebody that you might want to look at for this job, it couldn't have been a tighter fit. I got to work with livestock auction owners, got to work for the industry, get to spend a lot of time on the road in DC at conferences. We happen to be located in Kansas City. That's LMA's corporate headquarters. So I got to live in Kansas and still travel and work on livestock policy on the national field. That's pretty cool. And an opportunity I didn't think I was going to get nearly as young as I got it. It was really neat for me to get that chance in my late 20s that, some people spend a career working on the Hill and USDA to try and get one of those jobs because they don't turn over very often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It was kind of like serendipity there, that she retires and then you're available. And certainly, I guess it probably didn't help that you had already had relationships, with Roy and them, right?
I think it definitely did. I think I'm sure that Mark, as my name came up as somebody that was suggested, he ran it by the people who work in Kansas and heard from them. Yeah, that could be interesting. Bring her in and talk to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so now, how many years have you been there?
12 years. 12 years,
12
which
years.
I feel like I am, just a year or two out of college. It doesn't seem like I could be somebody who went to law school, had another job, and then have been at this job for 12 years. But life comes at you quick.
Amen. Yeah, for sure. And of course, I'm a big fan of the LMA, and I've been, affiliated with them since 2002. Just I'm a big fan. What they do, not only for auctioneers, but what they do for our industry as a whole is just, I think, so many people have no clue, and I don't even know how we would. I thought about this. How would you kind of let them know about some of the back things that you guys do that are the unseen components that basically, really support our industry? The average producer has no idea what you guys do for.
You're right, and I think it's a unique trade association in a couple ways. One is just the level of integration with our member businesses. Your local livestock auction that's an LMA member. If they want to change their tariff, we've got somebody that helps them do that. If they sell their business, they probably work with their regional officer and have help, with that new person getting registered and bonded. If they've got a legal question, Jara Settles, who's on my team, she's our general counsel. One of your member businesses is up to 10 hours a year of kind of market related legal work. And so we have an insurance agency and provide insurance for a lot of our members. There's just a lot of services there provided that not everybody would see day to day. So that's what we do for our members proper. But you kind of indicated, what do we do for the industry? And in some ways, I think that is even bigger. I believe in auctions. I believe in price discovery. I believe in opportunity and competition. And auctions are all of those things. And so we've had leadership in recent years who've said, yes, we will be the experts on the Packers and Stockyards Act and Animal ID because we have to for our businesses, but we're going to take it a step further. And we are going to be parts of coalitions that bring the livestock industry together to try and find unity on how do we have a future with livestock producers in it in the United States. And that involves, from my perspective, maybe tax policy and making sure some of the Tax Cuts and Job Act components are reauthorized this year. If Congress doesn't act this year, our death tax or estate tax level is going to drop quite a bit, and it's going to hit a lot more ag producers. I think we're going to be successful in keeping it at a higher rate, but we got to speak in a unified voice in that. We're having a lot of conversations in the association just about what that future looks like and how we can be a part of bringing people together to ensure that livestock producers have a way to succeed in the future.
Mm-hmm. Here's another subject that I could bring you on, and we probably could have a full podcast on. The situation where families that want to hand their business, their farm or feedlot or whatever it is, their agriculture entity down to their children. That if they don't, and I don't know to what level structure that transfer. It leads itself, it's open to all kinds of situations where it's going to be very difficult for them to proceed on with that particular entity in the way it was, i.e. the fact that, with these taxes and that, that, I have a situation, that I know of personally where a family, they probably could have done a little more polishing up to what their trust was, but it ends up that the children that want to stay in the ag business are now going to have to go, they're going to have to achieve financing to pay their portion of what the death taxes are, and then to buy their siblings out. Well, then when they do that, the situation won't make a profit.
Yeah.
So now they're at these crossroads where they're like, we have to give up our family's legacy here now, because
that's so tough. That's so tough.
That's not what our parents and our grandparents wanted.
It's not, but if we want something, we got to plan for the thing we want. And so I would really encourage ag families to have those tough estate planning conversations and have them a lot earlier than you think you might need to have them. Because farm accidents happen. My best friend's dad, thankfully he's still with us, but he's paralyzed. He was stepped on by a bull when we were in middle school, and life changes really quickly, right? And so you never know when you're going to need to have something in place. And then you also, they're tough conversations. There's never an easy time to have a tough conversation. So I'd recommend ag families probably bring in professionals, and there's really good resources. You're going to want to work with an estate attorney, but in some cases, like in Kansas, there's I think it's an ag mediation service that is part of the K-State Research and Extension that is a service you can utilize to help navigate the conversations. Okay, there's 4 kids and 2 come back to the farm and 2 take jobs in town or not engaged in the operation. What is equitable? What is fair? Are all 4 expecting to get a quarter of that operation? Well, are we taking sweat equity into account? Or, how are we compensating the 2 that came back? Tough conversations, but you got to have them on the front end. And I've seen, I think in my mind, one of the really poor outcomes is not only an operation not being able to stay together, having to sell land or things like that, but it's also relational, right? You don't want the day of or after your parents' funeral to be the time that you split the sheets with your siblings. You want to have a plan in place that everybody knows about and is on board with that helps keep things together. And so that's a plea. That's a plea for, if you're part of an ag family that's got any assets at all, make sure there's a plan in place. Because a lot of our operations were land rich and cash poor, and that makes things like taxes really tough to handle.
Well, and I think you hit on, in the early part, you said there, which is so true, is to have that early hard conversation. And, I think so many parents, ag families especially, they don't want to, have that conversation. Bobby stayed on the farm or the feedlot his whole life, and then Jimmy left and went to San Francisco. And then when mom and dad die, Jimmy thinks he's entitled to half of everything that's been,
And that's only the answer if everybody agrees to that answer on the front end, right? That is not fair to, I think it was Bobby, you said, that was there working, anticipating probably more than half, right? And so that's why we have to have the conversation on the front end.
But so many don't. But I'm totally agree with you 100%. We kind of went off a little rabbit trail there about services.
It's important, though. It's important. If
marketing.
Anybody listens to this, we've got all sorts of good advice for them, right?
For sure.
Maybe we just saved a ranch.
For sure. Yeah. Or a family dynamics. So, for sure. I want to get back to, some of the, benefits that the livestock marketing, one thing that we kind of went past just a little bit is also, your guys' work and really in handling the humane situation, the animal handling deal. Livestock marketing is the forefront for that. I don't care what industry, livestock industry we in. I like, the Livestock Marketing Association took a long time ago, made an effort to make sure that was something that they really, really undertook and put up strategies, that lend us today where we are, because things are so much better today than they were.
It's long enough ago, it was even before my time at LMA, that our board decided, hey, animal handling is such a priority that we're going to have an animal handling guide and training, and we're going to have assessments of our members. And it's one of the few ways you can get kicked out of the LMA. I mean, essentially not paying your bills, breaking the law, or not following animal handling assessments and not being willing to make corrections when assessments indicate there's need for improvement. That's pretty extreme. That's showing that this is something we really believe in. We even have third-party assessments where, a certain percentage of our membership every year, in addition to the assessment they might get by an LMA staff person, might have a independent third-party assessment as well. And we just think it's that important.
Well, and I think all agriculture, because there's always so many misnomers in agriculture, and you could see why, Chelsea, when we say that probably less than 2% of our total population is involved in any kind of form of production, agriculture, food or fiber, you can see where that other 98%, is so distant from it sometimes. I mean, we're talking so distant from them that any little thing that they see or read or perceive, can become, their reality. And, I want to commend the LMA and I was, I was involved with the LMA when they took that concerted effort to say, hey, listen, this is something we have to address as an organization, and not only as an organization, but as an industry. This needs to be talked about. And for so many times, I think in agriculture, we find ourselves, kind of playing defense. And I commend the fact that for once it's been an offensive deal. You know what I mean?
Yep. That playing offense shouldn't be offensive. Right. It should be the way we
pun
operate.
Intended, but they took the bull by the horn.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And things are so much better than they were. You hardly even hear that come up anymore. I'm
proud of the commitment that LMA and our members have to animal handling. And I agree with you that it's one of those topics that we needed to be on the forefront of, need to always be on the forefront of. And so, one interesting question is, what are those topics in the future? I could have told you a couple of years ago, I thought maybe sustainability was one of those. I think, there's still a lot of consumers that is kind of part of their mindset. It's no longer at the forefront from a administration, perspective, from a priority. But I think that there's some things like that, if we've got a lot of young people that are doing meatless Mondays or Fridays, and why do they feel guilty eating our product? That's a problem. We need to be having some conversations.
Amen for sure. But yeah, I've always said, to people, because I've been involved in agriculture most of my life or around it, that people would think that somehow or another that, a rancher would be at a point in time where he think abusing his animals would pad his bottom line. Animals that are not content don't perform well.
100%. And so the same thing can be said about sustainability. Profitability is sustainability. So I think that it helps just stopping people and having the conversation about, these are multi-generational operations. We take care of the environment because we want our kids to have the same opportunities we've had, better opportunities than we've had. We, take care of our animals because, that makes them more productive. And oh, by the way, we're eating the same meat that, is ending up in the grocery store. It's what we feed our families.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's some sadistic, people in any industry, but when you go to, and I've, prior to becoming an auctioneer, I was a feed and grain salesman, sold biologicals, pharmaceuticals. And I've been to a lot of ranches, and, you go to a ranch house and, on a winter morning and you go inside and there's 2 baby calves laying there, inside the living room, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. People have no idea that, the love and the compassion that ranchers have for their animals.
You just went full circle that bringing a calf in from the winter weather to the house was one of the narratives I used in my thesis research when I was trying to test, is it facts or stories that make people connect better and understand a livestock producer? That was one of the stories that I tested in that research.
Hey, man. And so is that when you researched, all that was written?
It was, yeah. And that was just from a data perspective, so it was written blends of facts and stories that were sent. I think it was an investment. I think K-State's Beef Cattle Institute sponsored it, or found people to sponsor it. So we sent those to, true, unbiased city people through this researcher organization. They read it and they answered some questions about their assumptions prior to and after to. And so we tested attitudinal shift. And then we looked at, did the attitude shift more based on data or narratives or some blend? And the blend was the most successful.
Well, for sure. Then that leads to, the whole reason that I do this podcast is that, the reason I started this podcast, in 2015, when I basically lost my voice completely. And I was 97% of my income came from auctioneering. I had to do something. And my wife had we started a magazine, originally was a magazine. And the premise of starting that magazine was that I would come home with all these wonderful stories from being in the feed business and then also being in the auction business. And my wife would be like, gosh, these are great stories. She's not from the ag industry. And so that's the whole reason that I
Mhm.
started this, that I wanted to tell our stories
Yeah.
from our perspective, and give people opportunity just like you to tell our story, because we have a great story. And yeah, there's bad apples in every industry, but as a whole, we have a great industry. And I always tell people, you'd say agriculture and auctioneers, it just doesn't hardly get any better than that, you know.
As I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I think I picked the people that
Mhm.
that first cattle industry convention I was at. Yeah, I liked the policy debate. Yeah, I like livestock. Grew up around livestock. I think raising the best protein in the planet is pretty cool. But at the end of the day, I think it's the people that do it is what I'm really picking as I pick my industry. And I love what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's cool to be able to tell those stories and hear those stories. And it's nice to do it in a platform that somebody can driving down the road, tune in and hear a little bit about other people from across our industry.
Yeah, and we've been blessed, man. I just, I kind of struggled because this is almost our third year, and I struggled for a while with it. I just wasn't getting the right traction, and I wasn't at a point in time where I wanted to really pay a lot of money for an engineer. I
Mm-hmm.
probably could have went at it faster and gotten bigger quicker, but we just crossed some major milestones, and so it's been pretty exciting from that. And I'm glad, because it
Congratulations.
really is. Thank you. But really is my passion is to get our word out.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people and what's really cool about it is we have algorithms that we're able to track, and we're having downloads for, of course, from Brazil, but we have a lot of downloads from Europe. And it's really cool that and I watch some of those because it also tells me how long they listen to the program. They're
Mm-hmm.
really, a lot of them listen to the whole program, especially
That's awesome.
in Italy and Belgium. They listen
Mm-hmm.
to, and even some Asian countries listen to the whole program.
Hmm.
So I think that's pretty cool. And for sure, that's why I wanted to have you on here, because your story is so great. And I one thing that we haven't talked about that I do want to talk about though too is being a female in the agriculture
Mm-hmm.
industry. Man, how far you guys have come in the last 20 years, that and I think it's remarkable that our industry has embraced females, and to the point in time now that we have a Secretary of Agriculture that's a female.
Mm-hmm.
And Chelsea, I think you're a excellent you're an excellent promoter, but more importantly, I think you give young ladies, young girls, somebody to look up to. And even like Madison, I told
Mm-hmm.
Madison, I said, isn't it nice that she can get to meet you and talk with you, somebody that's so eloquent and educated, but then is from our industry. You're a real asset to our industry.
I totally appreciate that. And as someone who's raising stepdaughters, our girls they're a little older. They're 17 and 19, so they're about done raised. But it is something to be intentional about, and I love that I can be an example for other young people, women in particular, that want to come into ag. I'll tell you, for the most part, as soon as you prove competence, I've had pretty good experiences in terms of people being really welcoming and wanting to work with you and being willing to have the conversation. So most of the experiences have been good. There is still some work to be done. I think that
Sure.
unfortunately, a conversation I've had with my stepdaughters is certain things feel different coming from a woman as it relates to assertion, and especially being a strong, confident female, you got to know that that's not going to hit everybody quite right.
Yeah.
And so I hope
Especially
we
being
can
an attorney.
for sure. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think there's still work to be done, but man, I wouldn't change the industry I picked for the world. And I'm proud of us for being, I know women that had much different experiences. I've got a attorney I look up to that's a female, that she's quite a bit older than me, that talked about, in some of her early meetings as an attorney, being asked to get coffee. That's not happening. So maybe we've raised that glass ceiling. Not totally shattered it, but we've raised it, and happy to be a part of that.
Yeah. And for sure, women like you, are going to lead us into the next where we don't have those conversations anymore. And so I'm proud of our agriculture industry that, we've taken that on, and women play, pivotal roles now. And I mean, she's Secretary of Agriculture, So
Mhm.
how cool is that? Hey, before we get going here, I could be on here for 2 hours with you, but I know you're busy and I got to let you go. I just want to ask you from the legal perspective, what's one of the biggest things that you see that people in our industry do or get themselves involved with that they have no idea that they probably shouldn't be, that they're messing with fire?
Oh man, that is such a good question. That's such a fascinating question. I almost want to ask Jara Settles, our general counsel, that question because she is the one who kind of takes the day-to-day questions from market owners. I'll tell you the biggest one I'm going to say is quit extending credit to the extent you do. And when I say extending credit, I know that cattle move before money moves in our industry. But when something feels not right, don't sell to an individual second time. That maybe that check's in the mail, maybe it's not, but what would be wrong with asking them to do a wire or an ACH for that first sale before you sell to them a second time? Spend an incredible amount of time working on payment issues and defaults, and I'm really proud of some of the tools we've developed as LMA and industry in that space. We have a livestock dealer statutory trust now. If you are defaulted upon by a livestock dealer, you're in much better standing today than you were, for example, when Eastern Livestock defaulted. We've got payment protection insurance, which is a great product that if you are a livestock auction and don't know about that, I would encourage you to ask. But yeah, that's probably my number one thing is we trust people a little too much. And particularly as it relates to money, I love that we're a handshake business. I love that, we don't really do contracts. And if they do, they might be on the back of a bar napkin, but it's a lot of money at today's prices. And so I would like to see people protect themselves a little bit better as it relates to payment.
Yeah, the risk. But correct me if I'm wrong, but don't the packers and stockers, if they were to follow protocol that's listed, that kind of can't really happen. Is that right?
So technically, if you're regulated by the Packers and Stockyards Act, which means if you're a packer or a livestock auction or a dealer, you must pay promptly. And prompt payment is defined by initiating payment by the close of the next business day after price is determined. One of the issues we run into is that a check in the mail still counts. And our mail service is just so much worse than it was even 5-10 years ago. I am still getting returned Christmas cards. Yeah, I'm still getting returned Christmas cards, and it's mid-April, right? So I think that's part of our challenge and part of something we as an industry might have to have some conversations about. I talk to a lot of livestock auctions that, okay, I've got a Tuesday sale. Instead of a mail check Wednesday, I'd prefer an ACH or a wire transfer Thursday or Friday, maybe even Monday, right? The following week.
Wait a minute. What would be wrong with that night? If the cattle were purchased and taken out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Nothing would be wrong with that if you are the receiver of funds. I think that one challenge with our industry is that you've got some pretty large participants that float is a thing. And let's say that they're buying feeder cattle. They might not be financed quite well enough to pay for those feeder cattle before they're paid by the feed yard. And so that's one of the challenges we have to think about in our industry. But one thing an auction could do and should know is they can have their own payment requirements. So just because Packers and Stockyards says a check in the mail by the next business day is fine, doesn't mean you have to be fine with that. So long as they're uniformly applied, you could have a rule that we need to receive payment before cattle move, or, payment has to be, in the bank by X date. Check in the mail is not going to work if the mail is slow. So that's just something for people to think about.
Yeah, it always amazed me, I've never owned a sale barn, but I've worked in a lot of them, and I've seen the perils that, sale barn owners have gone through. And one thing that's always amazed me, you couldn't go down and buy a pickup truck at your local Ford dealer and drive that thing off and then pay for it in the next couple of days.
You couldn't. One thing I think about all of the time, especially when I take these calls about, this person owes me 7 figures, but it'll be fine, is I once won a tractor, like a Case IH Farmall 55A, and a Farm Bureau discussion meet, an American Farm Bureau discussion meet. I won a tractor. I was in law school at the time. I thought, this was just a huge coup that, totally going to change the trajectory of my life. tried to get the local dealership to sell it. They weren't moving it quite quick enough. So I sold it on tractors.com. And I made that man from Missouri bring me a cashier's check. And when he handed me the cashier's check, I called the bank and made sure it was a real cashier's check. And then I drove directly to my bank, holding it literally in my hand. And, it was, I can't remember, 15 grand maybe, right? And so I'm talking to people that are owed 10 or 100 times that, and just thinking, it's a great industry. It's great people. We do take some risks with money that may or may not totally make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess on the flip side, it is quite remarkable if you really think about the scope of how many dollars in cattle are traded on a daily basis, and we don't really have that many catastrophes.
Mm-hmm. The percentage of defaults is low. That is true. That is true. So people are trusting for a reason. I just have seen when it does happen to you, how impactful it can be to your business and life. And I don't want to talk to more people going through that.
And for that reason, maybe that's why some people leave their guard down, and then a lot of it's protocol that they've been doing maybe even for generations. You know what I mean?
My dad bought cattle. Yeah. I've been told, Bob would be offended if I asked Bob for a wire transfer. And I was like, maybe we need to work on how we ask. But I mean, I think it's offensive that you're having to pay interest while you're waiting for his check to come in the mail, right? So maybe you frame your ask up a little different.
Or what happens if, unfortunately, Bob goes down the road and gets killed?
For sure. Or, one default scenario I see happen is, Bob was never meaning to default, but Bob resold those cattle and somebody didn't pay him, and it's a domino effect situation. I mean, there are ways that this can happen that you got to be aware of. Talk
about a house of cards, huh?
For sure.
Anyways, well, hey, Chelsea, I sure enjoyed having you on this morning, and I look forward to seeing you. I'm going back. We'll see. We're going to be at Dunlap.
Awesome.
In Dunlap. What are we going to be there? 4, 6, 7, 5, 6,
yeah,
7?
Very beginning of June. So weekend before the World Series weekend. So we're a week earlier with our convention and contest this year. Would love for folks to come. Convention's going to be in Omaha, Nebraska, and then Dunlap will host the World Livestock Auctioneer Championship that Saturday.
And I don't know a lot of things, but I do know this. I promise you, the Shaben family will put on a fantastic. Actually, it was the first contest I went to in 2002. I hadn't went to a contest, and Max Oliveira called me. Max said, "Hey, Paul," because I had been toying, with going to a contest. If you were ever going to go to a contest, sign up and get to the Shaben deal. And so I'm like, so anyways, back then, that's when we sent in, we used to send in a VHS tape. And then I guess they brought judges into Kansas City and they watched the tapes, and then, they declared who was going to go to there. But I went in 2002 and went to Dunlap, and of course, both John's mother and father were both alive then, and they were fantastic people. I don't know if you ever got to meet them. But
I didn't. I've met the brothers and lots of nephews, but I never met his parents. I agree with you. The Shabens will put on a show for sure, and they've got Will Epperly involved now too, so that just adds a whole nother level of that.
And the cattle will be tremendous.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're going to see.
In that country, it's pretty cool.
And I know John, he's gone out. He's been thinking about this for a while. Him and Will, I can promise you, they're going to put out a show list of some cattle that probably, I arguably would be the best that you'll see in the United States.
Oh, they'll be fun. They'll be fun to see. I was in Iowa. I was actually at Iowa Beef, did a packing plant tour a couple weeks ago and went out back and watched the cattle going in to be killed. And man, they're pretty awesome product they put out in that territory. And then it was cool to see that and then see the carcasses go by and see multiple prime carcasses in a row. I mean, it's unique.
Yeah. Yeah, just the quality that the cattle there is going to be tremendous. So anyways, well, I look forward to seeing you then. So I'm going to let you go to your day.